So we're in the inner sanctum of my studio right now where I make all of my crazy, literally balling pieces. So welcome in, we'll show you guys around, show you some stuff. You know, we spend so much time just kind of toiling in the studio making these things by ourselves, and you put them out into the world and you get to sort of have an experience with people as they come see it in real life and see what the reactions are like and everything like that, which is always super rewarding. And we had the opening one night, and then the next day I just kind of had it open to take care of some stuff. And I'm sitting in the space and I see this head pop in, right? And he looks around and he's like, "Is it cool to come back?" And we're like, "Yeah." He comes back with Allen Iverson. And Iverson comes in and he's like touching everything. And normally I would, normally that's a problem, but hey, I can do whatever he wants. So I got to talk with him and his team a little bit. And that was a crazy moment for me, just because I feel like aesthetically he's such an embodiment of a lot of the look of this thing. So it was really interesting kind of growing up in Boston as a brown kid, because I was around a bunch of Italians and Irish and Jews that I didn't really have any other connection with besides sport. And that was the thing that I think has informed a lot of my practice now, is that basketball was that place for all of us to be able to come together. And we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and kids were playing hockey and kids were playing football, and we just couldn't afford the equipment in that way. So the basketball court was a great place for me to be able to, as a brown kid, as a poor kid, around all of these other ethnicities, particularly in Boston at that time, that were not necessarily always very welcoming to people outside of those communities. But the basketball court was a great place where everyone was equal, and we all had the same goal in mind. So within the confines of the court, we forgot about the race, we forgot about the class, and just became focused exactly on the sport, which I think is like one of the most beautiful things about basketball. The name has kind of like an irony to it that I think is funny, and a good contrast to how serious I think the project can be perceived. We're taking this like utilitarian piece of sporting equipment basically and re-rendering it in this super delicate luxury process that kind of has this ironic quality to it, in that thing that it represents initially from a sporting standpoint, and what it represents from like a luxury element as sort of the symbol of like this new money reaction to like, oh, I'm rich now, so I want to put crystals and gold on everything, but you actually give back the functionality of what the equipment's designed to do in that process. So that kind of has like an ironic narrative twist into it, which I think is really funny. So like as I was approaching this project for the first time and learning about stained glass as sort of a historic medium that these kings would use to sort of stunt their wealth and power over the manor, so to speak. Just thinking a lot about what basketball had evolved into culturally, and the sort of power that these guys had over everyone. And they were just sort of dictating so many aesthetic choices that I thought were really interesting to sort of parallel those two lines together. When I first got into this whole thing, I had never touched stained glass before. I'd never really considered it as a medium before, and it's pretty sort of forgotten about at this point. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I found this stained glass studio with all these old timers that have been doing it their whole lives. So I apprenticed under these guys for about a year, who taught me all the tricks. And basically stained glass, the process of making it is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, but you're also making all of the pieces. So once you have your whole design set up, you'll basically cut out each individual piece from glass and grind it all down to the exact shape to fit into the design, which is like insanely time consuming and like really crazily detail focused. The process is very sort of cumulative in that each one sort of locks in the next one. So you have to be pretty decisive with all of that stuff as you go on with it. So, okay, so we got these pieces cut, and what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of marking off where some bits need to get grinded down to fit into the design. And then we'll take this over to the grinder and get that stuff sorted out. Once that grinding process is done, the next thing that we have to do is to wrap the copper foil, wrap each piece in copper foil. Basically what we're doing here is we're creating something for the solder to adhere to keep all the pieces stuck together. The copper actually is going to get totally covered by the solder, so this is like pure utility to create something to hold the glass pieces together. When it's all done like that. So then again, the same repetition happens with the process. Like we were talking about earlier, it's like you're putting together a puzzle, but you're making all of the pieces. So you end up going back over each of the pieces several times. So Flux is a chemical that just basically helps encourage the adhesion process between the copper and the lead solder. So it's kind of like the glue you put on beforehand. All the edges will get soldered together and then put into one of these frames that hold everything together. So it's a really crazily time-consuming process, and it's really sort of like fastidiously focused in a really tight place. But the end effect of it is super rewarding. These just came out just the other day, actually. The NBA and I just collaborated on a release that we're calling the Crystal Prints, and it's this gold foil stamp on a piece of clear poly that we suspended in this glass floating frame. And there's sort of these interpretations of each team's logo in this like reduced, minimalized form. And it was a really cool project to work on with them, and a nice way I felt like to help create a piece for like the adult fan that wants to be able to celebrate the team. And that relationship, I feel like, is really intimate one between the fan and their team. So having something that feels elegant, sophisticated, that a grown-up can put in their office or in their apartment, that's more than just a player dunking on someone. Rendered in gold foil and then attached to this clear poly and suspended in this glass floating frame. And they're all hand numbered. We did an edition of 1,000 per team. And super proud of the way these came out and having them out in the world. And just seeing like that initial next to the logo is very, very crazy. Kevin Durant's first year with the Warriors, we created this sort of like private gallery experience just to kind of welcome him to the Bay. And we took a bunch of photographs that he had taken and staged them in this gallery setting with some works that I had made and some custom pieces that I made for him to welcome him to town. And it was a cool moment. It was nice to sort of be able to, as someone that had been living in the Bay for a while, it was nice to be able to do something to welcome him to town. It was the last thing that I did in San Francisco before moving, so it was a nice sort of way to close the chapter on that part of my life too, and be a part of a cool moment. I just kind of been wanting to try something new and sort of expand whatever this thing was that I was pursuing at the time. So LA felt like a really natural progression. So packed all the things up and cruised down not long after. There's a lot of culture around the arts in LA that I felt like was lacking a little bit in San Francisco. So it's been nice to tap into that community in a big way. And also I think LA is just one of the hubs. And if people aren't already here, they're coming through. So it makes it a lot easier for meetings and studio visits and having people through. And you know, all the players work out here and live here in the off season. So it makes those meetings a lot easier too. One of the big things that I'm trying to get into going forward is trying to create more playable spaces and trying to figure out how to take the aesthetic into more of an experience that people can participate in. This whole project started really organically, just born from my love for the sport and wanting to explore some different mediums for vessels of storytelling around it. So for it to sort of start off that innocently and organically go into what it's become, doing projects with LeBron, people like that, is really crazy. One of the dreams that I've been pitching to anyone who'll listen is basically trying to build a court that's completely made out of marble and drop it out in the middle of nowhere for people to make a pilgrimage to and sort of create this destination that becomes the place where people can celebrate the sport. Completely marble court with inlaid brass three-point line and everything like that. And the thought is that to try to put it out like sort of between LA and San Francisco off the 5 so that people making road trips can kind of take a detour and take a shot on it, or also people to sort of make a pilgrimage to and have it be this place that is the celebration of sport. So everything's sketched out, everything's dialed in. We just need the money to figure out how to make it. So if you have a check to cut, we're ready to build it. It's a tricky question to try to parse out the story I'm trying to tell about myself throughout all of this. I think for me, it's more of a tribute to the sport itself and trying to use these narrative elements to sort of pay tribute not only to sort of the aesthetic part of the game, but also sort of conceptually about what the game can represent, about bringing people together in that community. I think for myself, just trying to like be the vessel that tells that story is meaningful enough to me.